So Zoran is back. He wants to know, would I be willing, it's on your screen, to do a bit more in depth on Holbein. Maybe it's not your thing, but he just baffles me. When we were students, we went to see a room full of Velasquez in Vienna, and to me, at that time, it wasn't so impressive, but when I saw those small Holbeins, it was a revelation. It felt like this is not done by a human hand at all. So 20 years later, he still stands out in a similar way, like Vermeer. So as much as I don't get as many hits by doing these kinds of videos, I think I'll do one anyway. And for the simple reason that I want to make some comparisons, Boston School related type, it's really not, when I talk about Boston School, I'm really talking about a different way of approaching painting. I had an interesting conversation this week something online from somebody who was expressing a kind of a frustration with lost and found and our way of painting and that sort of thing. It sounded like he was, sort of exhausted. As much as he said he appreciates it, it sounded like he was exhausted from the, seeing too much of it, a quote style. And, so much of what we're talking about, it sounds like gimmicks and stunts and stuff like that. And this whole return, for example, to, if I said return to Boston School, you'd all listen to me. If I say this return to realism, the outline, the noodling of outlines, of contours, that approach to drawing, you wouldn't say that. You would say, oh no, that's the real thing, probably, right? But in fact, the reason I teach what I do even isn't because I think one is, in one sense, better than the other. You can make good pictures out of either, and I would again recommend you read Gamel's Twilight of Painting, and it couldn't be much better said. Kenyon Cox does similar things in the classic point of view. I think it's in the classic point of view, but where he talks about the difference or the similarities or the whatever, the two different kinds of painting, the old academic one, outline, based, colored drawings, and not to be put down, just saying that, and the visual impression based, which is effect based drawing. And so, anyway, my whole point is when I'm saying this stuff that I really am trying to address all that I do to students. Mastery of the visual impression isn't about a style. If you take an outline as the entire approach to a still life, you're going to have something, and at the end of the day, it looks like a style, much more than it looks like truth. That's why Velasquez switched from doing that kind of thing to doing what he was doing later, because he was looking for another level of truth. And my perception is not that it's a stylistic thing or it's, better at expressing this or that. It's that it's a better base for a student to work from because it's comprehensive. And anybody can do an outline, a noodled outline, an outline, and then noodle up the inside. I should say that, I don't mean to say, again, it's not a put down. I'm saying it's much simpler to understand, cut out a shape, and model it up. And it's actually more efficient in lots of ways to do it. I've done some things like commercial stuff from time to time, which I don't particularly enjoy, but I don't hate it either. But nevertheless, I've done that any number of times, and yet I find that either way will work, and there's something wrong with it, but there's something visually less true about outline-based stuff. It's very difficult to get a strong truth out of the outline-based approach because of the compromises that that are, or maybe I could even say because of the lack of capacity in a student, for example, to see this other body of data that isn't there, frankly, it isn't even needed, and you're exhausted before you'd ever get to any significant level of it. So, okay, I'll stop at that. Holbein is a great discussion. Holbein is so much the opposite, and yet he's very visually delightful and true frequently, but he has that baggage. I like that Zoran compares him to Vermeer because Vermeer really is a person who's beginning to incorporate, he's still clearly working. In fact, when I talk about Vermeer, I bring Holbein into the picture as the antecedent, and because there's something truer as you're moving along here. I'll show you all that stuff. But I like that he brings out that it makes him feel good, like Vermeer does, because there's a lot of similarities. And I'm not using Vermeer in the pictures here. I have a lot of pictures to get through. Let me see if I can do this quick. So here's Hans Holbein the Younger, and this is who we're talking about. It's 1497 is his birthday. So that's well after even Michelangelo, Da Vinci and Michelangelo. So, and this is being done in North Country, as opposed to Italy, or the Netherlands. So, or Germany. I've actually forgotten. I don't know if I even looked it up. But it's all that same area of the world where oil painting was actually created or used really most effectively for the first time, at least in the West. So I'll just go through some other things. This one on the right is Erasmus. I can show you King Henry VIII. That's the era he was in. Gives you some idea. I myself, by the way, having read the Idiot, I think this painting of the Christ entombed is I think it's referred to by I want to say Raskolnikov. That's not who it is in the Idiot, but whoever the protagonist is in the Idiot, he brought this up, and it's quite a striking, quite a staggering little piece of painting. In some senses, not a whole lot different from Velázquez, and yet in another sense, very different. But nevertheless, here's the down below is the scene of the with the smeared, here. Let me get my arrows going here. With this smeared skull, if you stand at one side and look at this skull, you can see that he would have had to have painted this by turning the canvas really extremely to one side, and then he could have painted it like in a sight-size kind of a way. If you turn the canvas, if you have a skull sitting there, you turn your canvas, turn it and turn it and turn it and turn it, and then sit it up, and then you have to reach over and paint to get this thing to look the same on a long pattern to get the widths to feel right. The lengths will be going anyway. It's very, very curious. But it also made me begin to wonder about how much he was doing, in the world of using visual tools. I mean, lenses and other things. I'll show you what I mean later on. So each of these pictures is a cutout. Basically, it's a cutout, and then areas are modeled up. But it's cut out really sharply all the way around. That's something that's fairly characteristic, and as I said, Vermeer is also doing that essentially. The one on the left is the nearest thing to, and I use this in comparing him to Vermeer. It's the nearest thing to a Vermeer, but it really does lack the visual integrity. That thing that seems to have been accomplished with Vermeer by his studies through a lens or with the camera obscura, he saw things that Vermeer appears not to have seen. And the one on the right is actually a longtime favorite of mine. I did memory studies of it, and he's a very nice guy to use for memory studies because he's got these sharp edges. They're so sharply contrasting. This also reminds you quite a lot of Ang, the very sharpness of all the cutouts of all the different areas. But as well as the objects, as well as every little detail that gets done on them, they're all, it's possible that one reason people respond to pictures like this is because you are very farsighted, or you are you have very good eyes. Nearsighted people, I think, are more naturally going to respond to an impressionist. I don't mean fuzzy picture, but an impressionist picture as the way you see things. And it's certainly true that as I think I mentioned, the guy who's nearsighted is going to have to, instead of zooming in, because he doesn't have the ability. It's a major strain in his eyes. Whereas a person with 20/20 vision or so is going to naturally just zoom right in on everything. Just everything, all of his data collecting is by zooming in. And I think that there's a sense of that in Holbein, that he's just extremely clear-sighted. There's not a bit of fuzz in his vision. And that affects ultimately the way you work, but I think it also may affect the way you respond to some of these things. as being, it may be in your own mind more true. Now, the one on the left is a nice example of what we begin to talk about when we're talking about Vermeer. The only thing I think that I remember Gamel ever saying about him was that he was known to be, and you can read this in other sources now, but he was known to be the person who modeled with the least. In other words, he didn't overmodel, and that's a very typical statement. I mean, and you look at his drawings, you see it much more specifically. But you can see that there are two things in the on the left that typically show up in his pictures. One is that he paints a head one color, and then he models it in that color. He doesn't. You'll see very soon the difference between him and say Giorgione. But even when he's showing, for example, the difference, and I don't trust any of these paintings to be accurate, but this appears to be a pink head. This one here may actually be of an earlier stage where he might have been actually working with an underpainting and not having gotten to the full wave of color that he wanted yet, if this is true. And all the pictures I've seen of it look like it is. But this is but this gives an example of that. Also, where you see the hands and the head, they're all one color note, and it's just drawing. So, and that simplifies things. It really does, and it simplifies the process for you, so you can be more efficient. And there's no question about it. You just will lack the grand color thing, and so it doesn't mean you won't have any color. You might be redder around the nose or the cheeks and places like that, but it's still the basis is one color note. Yeah. Let's get past that. By the way, I just want to show this for fun. If you can even see these, I'm betting you can't, but these are two memory studies. Must have been part one of either of these because both of them are off in significant ways. You know how I do memory studies? I do the series of them. I do this one and then I do it over and over and over again. This one here I think I did based on the squares. For the first time I actually made a rectangle based on the photograph was sitting in it. And then I memorized using the references of the rectangle rather than the references of a crosshairs, as I've indicated to you all before. But these are very nice for memory studies if you can find them with really good values. Where the values really show silhouettes nicely. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of history so you can see that this guy didn't come out of nowhere. His father was a painter before him, and his influences are. And what was he? Like 30 years younger, or older rather than his son. So he would have had all these influences, but oil painting sort of really possibly begins with Van Eyck. And some of these amazing things, I'm just showing you because they did them. By the way, here's a good example. It's the same painting. Look at this is green in this one, and this is basically, it's a green, but it's more blue than green. It's just astonishing what happens with these reproductions. Don't believe a word of reproductions. But I show you this one because this one is that single note color scheme, and just drawing. Here's the red of the hat and just drawing. It's the way that these guys were working. I say they were working that way, and I say for the most part. But yeah, so if something was blue, it was the blue, and the shadow in it was color X, and the middle tone was whatever, and they modeled with it. And it wasn't, there was no attempt by these guys by anybody, I should say, until significantly later, to do more what we would call impressionist stuff. So, all right, so let me just give you some dates here then. You can see these guys, 1390, that's Van Eyck. Now, I'm gonna have to have them, I gotta remember, let me go to the next guys first, and I'll go back and run them. I didn't mean to jump that one in, I got out of place. So Van der Weyden is 1399. Now, Van der Weyden, from the time I ever saw Van der Weyden, I was astonished at what I'd call the realistic modeling that he did here. And so that's the Van der Weyden when you see it in the image to come, but 1399, so that's 9 years after Van Eyck. Now some of these guys, by the way, are doing mixtures of oil painting and with underpaintings of casein or whatever those egg tempers, things like that. And that's one of the reasons why these things, the drawings, for example, is really fixed. It's fixed and then colored, and then you do some stuff over it. But with fast drying stuff, you can't do all this messing around. You can't keep the whole thing wet, the whole surface wet. So it does affect, I think, ultimately the way you end up, with these cutouts. But again, you can see the single color, it's one color in its drawing. So it's not color movements or anything like that. There's Van der Weyden, there's Campan, and this is 1430. So here's 40 years later, it's still before his dad. And there again, you're seeing that same exact thing, the single color for the turban and the single color for et cetera, et cetera. And this is quite a lovely sense of form on this one, by the way. That begins to go in another way, sort of beyond a little bit what the others do. And also has some sweet color in it. It's really, really, really lovely stuff. And of course, I don't believe a word of these pictures, so I'll get away from that. And then there's Memling, and I show you Memling, that's him over here, to get you to Bellini. So let me go back to the other guys and just show you. Let me make sure I haven't missed anybody. No, I haven't. Let me just go back to the other guys now and show you what I was trying to do there. So Van Eyck, Van der Weyden, Memling, and Campan. And then in 1497, finally shows up Holbein. I don't have a picture of anything by his father. I just found drawings. I think I did find some stuff, and they weren't very impressive. These guys are all much stronger painters. So there's your workup, but you can see they're all doing exactly the same thing. And I think the one thing you just simply say about Holbein is that he made more complex pictures frequently, the backgrounds being like this, and he seemed to just put in more eyeball work. He just looked longer and harder. But by how much? Well, the way it shows is in the fingers. These guys almost all have these funny spindly fingers. They look like they're painting out of their imaginations. And their faces are actually quite like, they look like very likely to be very like. Even you see people like Titian, sometimes the faces don't look as realistic, as true as these guys. But when you get to Holbein, it looks like he's actually virtually tracing. That's how accurate he's being with his outlines. But we'll get into that. So there you are. But then now let's put in, and now again, I don't trust these things, but you can see that this is Bellini. Bellini was the teacher of Titian and Giorgione, and it really changed everything. So here's the Memling, and look at the sense of color and space. I mean, the whole idea of chroma seems never to have occurred to these guys over here. It was just all drawing all the time. Basically, it has this color, and then you just model it. But the idea of putting red lips, I mean, what is that? What would that be if we put red lips on a guy? On the other hand, you can see that this whole thing is a fully operating color scheme. Visual impression, rather comparatively more by color, like the Impressionists to come. And so there you can see that these two on the right, Bellini, he's doing basically the same thing. He's got a single color. He's got a single color in the Christ, and and they just draws. And the drawing isn't anywhere near as, I'd say the right word might be looked into compared to the other ones, although I should say in the Christ. But in this one here, he's really done very similar things, and in this one here as well. This one I remember doing memory drawings of as a young student as well. It's not a great reproduction, is it? Anyway, so let's go on. Now, what I'm going to show you here is that these paintings, these drawings are so articulate. The lines are so clean and so precise. The lines, right? And the drawing is so understated. Now, this is where the point was made. Maybe it was Paxton, who knows who it might have been. But the conversation was always about how little values he used to express form. I mean, it's an astonishing thing how well he did that. But it was also characteristic of the paintings of all those guys. So it isn't unique to Holbein. On the other hand, we have this whole mass of drawings by Holbein where he's using this very fine point, very, very, very fine point. And he's drawing with a line. Now, you're going to see that Ang does exactly the same look of a line. This is just line drawing 101. These guys aren't doing construction drawing. They are simply putting down the actual line and drawing this line, comparing it to that line. Do everything the way I'm trying to get people to do it. Even though I'm being an impressionist in my overall look. I say an impressionist, again, a visual order guy. And you're going to see that in a difference in a second. But just look at the beauty of these lines as much as you can see them. I hope you can get a bigger screen. My little one is even hard for me to see here. Notice the line work. Just notice the line work. But so many of these things look like the line is so continuous and so clean that they look like they might have been traced, like traced on a glass. Even in that mindset of, that idea of blind contour drawing that people show, is actually an exercise that's worthy of your time for a second, to look at a line in nature and actually count all the bumps on it. It's a very good thing to have done. Make sure you do it at some point, play around. So here you can see exactly the same pursuit of line in the undeveloped area. And then, of course, he develops the drawing much more than Holbein did, and it's all modeled way beyond what Holbein did in terms of the not over modeling. This, by the way, one of the things to observe about that previous work is that the the light is virtually always straight from the front. It's very rarely side light. This is something like this, or this is the nearest thing to the sort of side light I think that you ever see it. Now there is one where he does have more or less side light in a portrait, a painting. But this kind of drawing, this kind of painting, actually the outline base, it lends itself to pictures that are or to subjects that are set in front of a light background, and they're dark on both sides. So the light from the front darkens, so the shadow line is actually on the outside edge. And that's what makes those things relatively easier to do. And then you go to, this one here, though, is side lit. Most of Ang's stuff is actually more front lit than that. And again, look, you see him drawing these long, continuous lines. He throws a line, and he proves it with the next line, you know what I mean? And that's what he's doing. He's got the same look of the lines all the way through. And he just works it up in a bigger way. But again, you can see these elementary lines, the look of nature. You can see the feeling of actually floating lines as well. You can see lines that aren't all carefully connected. By the time you get to, even in the work of Paxton, you'll see him actually connecting the lines in very, Holbein-like ways. So here's Degas doing it, and Degas really is a master of linear drawing, of line drawing. And he's a master of form and all those things that you must be if you want to be considered a great draftsman. But you can see any number of places where you can see the search for the line is very much the same. I'm going to have to lean into this one and look at it closer. You can see even the marks here, they have the look of literally memorized lines, virtually as it were traced, right? That's in the very nature of what line drawing is at its best. And I can show you many, many more examples. I had Fetchin I was going to show, and I just decided to not go over. I'm going to go overboard anyway. So here's Disgustus John. Augustus John Gemmell called him Disgustus. He was at the Slade School. But again, you can see just this pursuit of line. The line, the innocent eye. There's something very interesting about that. Even with Ang, there's this sense of it being an innocent eye. You know what I mean? It's not where you're managing the idea of a finger and all those sorts, although Ang does that from time to time. But it's the innocent eye looking for the innocent line, just as surely as Monet looked for the innocent color with the naive line, right? It's a magnificent, wonderful thing that actually happens. Hey, Zoran, I'm sorry I'm taking off. I'm taking off completely from where we started, but I'm using this to actually introduce you to this other way of drawing. So this is a drawing that wasn't done from a simple outline. This is myself. This is Tarbell. And don't think I'm thinking of myself in any high way that I shouldn't. I'm just simply showing you that this is not done from a careful outline. It's done from effects. I drew this line here and masked it. And I drew this line down here and I masked it, right? I drew and masked, and I compared things. And I didn't make a continuous line at any point, So if there may be some, I've gone far enough in here where you can see that the approach is different. Maybe you can't see the approach is different. When you get to a certain point of finish, it's hard to tell. You jump over here to this Benson, though, and you can see there's actually line in here. And you can see line in a number of places, but it's always a floating line that's there to set up, and it's set up by the leading effects. That's what causes him to do it. They're leading effects, so he floats those lines around. I think anybody with an eye, including an Ang, is probably doing that on some level, but these guys really literally make it their form, right? So he's drawing this. But you can see up here where there's certain things that he's marking those places that read, and he's lining them up well with other things that read. And this is a Decamp doing the same thing. So that's it. I'm really saying, though, that my summary of Holbein, that he's very simple, and I think his attraction is incredibly simplistic. He's incredibly clean in his cutouts. He's very simple in his modeling. He's also very, very beautiful and articulate in in that modeling at that really, really shallow range. But it was also typical of all those guys. So there's lots to like about him. I mean, the artistry of Holbein and what separates people typically is they reach a level, higher in terms of this, the qualities that we admire in painting over time, which is one of the reasons I try to get everybody to go really do look up painters. I'm going to get out of here. Look up lots of different painters, by the way. That's all I was going to say. Look up lots of different painters and begin to get your idea, your head around what great painting is. Don't pick on this guy and say, I'm going to do this style X. And anybody can do either way. There's no crime in it. In fact, I recommend that students do both ways. Learn to do beautiful outlines this way and model them up and learn to draw from in the visual order. Okay? So that's my word to the wise student. All right. I'm 27 minutes. That's crazy. All right. See you later. Thank you very much. And thanks for the questions, Zoran. Oh, don't forget to subscribe, share, and all those things that I failed to get. My producers found a way of fixing, I see. Next time.